song about work. I think that was by a nice Swedish singer. Well, we heard the two speakers here before me, very positive towards digitalization. You showed now that you believe that this will create jobs. Okay, then I ask you, is this the description you find in the world of today? Is this the momentum you have in Europe? Is this what the newspaper is telling the people of this continent or other developed parts of the world? I would say no. On the contrary, the word very often used is protect the jobs we have, or even in times of crisis, save them. Very often when we hit into a crisis, I've heard a lot of people telling me and other political leaders, you should freeze society as it is now, and then we can defreeze it in a couple of years when all the turbulence, when all the problems are gone, as if everything is still in place. The way, if you listen to a lot of politicians of today, both on the left and right, when they describe how to create new jobs, they mean to duplicate jobs we already have by increasing demand, or even, as in the United States at the moment, bringing back jobs of yesterday into production. So what have they missed, or what have we missed? I'm pretty sure that you need to go directly to people and speak about this, and to understand the transformation that happens in the economy, and maybe not always refer to technical details, but to actually talk about their lives and how it's going to change. First of all, digitalization here mentioned, automation, robotization, globalization, everything that we now see. It has a huge impact, and it has only started. What we can see is that it makes everything shorter. Market cycles get shorter, business cycles get shorter, product cycles get shorter, and your career expectations, your career also gets shorter. So every choice you make, this is the job I want, will probably be much shorter than it used to be. Have we told people that story? Probably not. We still give them a gold medal if they stay in the same job in 25 years. And if they stay in 40 years, we think they're fantastic. So we are still sending the signal, stay at your own job, protect it. So that's the first. And the second is a great change in the life expectancy that you will see around you. In what way? We're going to live much longer. Not all of us, but actually we could now see people living 90, 100 years. And a lot of the years that we actually add to our lives are years when we are healthy or helped by medical care, able to keep on working. That is also a signal. So if the career plans get shorter, but we live longer lives, that means you need to change jobs more often. And not only once, probably twice, 3 times, 4 times. Have we prepared people for this? Are we telling this story? Or do they believe longer working lives leaves me with the chance of protecting my work even more, or saving it for the future? Thirdly, and this is a reference often made by Angela Merkel about our continent, just to remind you. So we are 7% of the world population, a decreasing 7%. We create 25% of the growth, a decreasing 25%. I think we're already at 24 or something like that. And we consume 50% of the welfare, tax-paid welfare of the world. And that is probably going to rise. So, if that is to be sustainable, this is a matter of how are we going to work in the future? And that goes down to every individual and what we are trying to achieve. And my experience is that the focus on duplicating jobs you already have by increasing demand will not work. You need to change perspective. You need to go down to incentives and to individuals and work much more on the supply side of your labor reforms. How do you do that? Well, 3 examples that we have experience from in Sweden. Learn about the marginal and the threshold effects of low-income earners. There is so much talks about the well-educated, the ones with the best salaries, the ones that already work 100%. They're mainly not our main problem, to be honest. Look at the ones part-time working. Look at the ones who actually just work some years but then stay outside of the labor market. Look if they have clear incentives for working. We found out that there are great differences in Europe, and a lot of people actually, if they get a job coming out from subsidies, do not get a stronger household economy. And we have a lot of Europeans, if they choose to go from part-time work up to full-time work, that will not see an effect on their household economy of working more. So learn about the incentives. A lot of people are not incentivized for working in Europe. That's not the only reason why they are not working, but they get great thresholds and a lot of problems in trying to get into the labor market. How do you change that? Well, a lot of developed countries have tried different ways of lowering income taxes for low-income earners. We try that in Sweden. You can have different tax deductions. There are different ways of doing it, but you need to understand why you do it, because you need to incentivize people to increase their working hours or to come out of subsidies. Secondly, you need to work with a work-first principle. And you think you do that, then you have missed the point, because most of society is actually not just about working. And everyone in our society do not love to work, because they get other interests. Especially, this was mentioned, pinpoint the older group. Look when people stop working in society, and you will find there are great differences in Europe. We have had a lot of incentives, tax breaks, for people to keep on working after the age of 65. And the big leap now in Sweden, just in a couple of years, we have doubled the amount of 65 to 69-year-olds that are working in Sweden. But in major parts of Europe, you will find that many people are leaving already at the age of 60. Why? Because the incentives are weak. They don't feel that they get a greater pension or greater lives by keep on working. And did I mention that they might live to be a 90 or 100 years old? So they might now face a period in their lives of 30 to 40 years when they are not working. That is not sustainable. That will not be possible in the future. We need to incentivize them to keep on working up in the ages of probably 70, 75. Then look at women. This is extremely important. Look at the incentives when you create a family for working. And you will find for a lot of men and women, but mostly women, the incentives are very weak. When you get a child, you leave very often the labor market for a time span which might be different. A lot of them do never come back, or they come back on part-time work. Why? Because the incentives are very weak. There are too little of good quality childcare in Europe to support men, but especially women, to get back into careers. And don't miss the point. Look at girls and women at schools and universities. They're performing much better than boys, ending up taking care of their families instead of making a career. Incentivize them. Help them to get back not only to part-time work, but to a full-time career, because we're going to need that. And thirdly, and finally, learn about the retraining schemes of your country and your society. There's too much talks about exit, meaning that you are laid off, and then you think you're just dropped off somewhere and you don't know where you end up. We have a lot of retraining schemes that is actually very often linked to social partners, as in Sweden, that are getting extremely good at helping people coming from one work over to another job in another sector. They basically did nothing in the 70s and the 80s. They started in the 90s, and now they're very good. They help people change their mindset, change their identity, change their incentives, and they help them to move on in the labor market. If you don't do that, don't think that everyone will do this just because they love to work. If you're 54 years old and you think no one will hire me, you will not even try. You need this kind of support. And the retraining schemes are very different in Europe. Many parts we hardly have them at all. In trying to focus on everything of this, I've written a Reinfeldt initiative. I have it down there, and I've gone through the marginal and thresholds effects in all your countries, and a lot of you have a lot of trouble. So the incentives are not as strong as you think to get people into work. And by finalizing, I think that's the thing we need to do, not just to clarify this welfare struggle we're having, but also to make inclusiveness in our society, to keep everything else that is much worse out of society. You need people to get a job, and you need them to have a job under a longer period of time, and therefore they need to change job and move alongside the labor market. Thank you very much.